Over the course of law practice that followed, which was 16 years doing workers' compensation law in Kentucky, within a system that masquerades as a legal system, but is in fact a political patronage system, I learned that the law is often nothing other than a weapon that is wielded by the hand that pays to use it, to bind, torture, and kill the truth. This touched off months of a second full-time job performed off the books, undercover, to learn as much as I could from the most renowned academic researchers, from individuals who had received Ibogaine, not just to treat opioid dependency, but to treat any number of traumas, much of which had been inflicted on warfighters, special operators who had been overseas and had come home to be faced with a Veterans Administration whose best response to their physical and spiritual carnage that they had experienced was a cocktail of synthetic pharmacology that in sum total anesthetized the soul while slowly euthanizing the body. Ibogaine, for reasons that are not known and by a mechanism that is not understood, has the capacity to essentially restore an individual's neurochemistry to that which existed before they ever took the first pill.
Today on the Seano Show, we're talking to Bryan Hubbard, a lawyer, policy advocate, and one of the country's most outspoken voices on addiction treatment reform. He's a CEO of Americans for Ibogaine, a nonprofit pushing for public education and research into Ibogaine as a potential breakthrough therapy for opioid dependence, PTSD, and other brain-related conditions. Bryan's journey has taken him from public service leading Kentucky's opioid abatement efforts to challenging the status quo on how we treat addiction at a systematic level. He's here to talk about why he believes innovation matters in recovery, the resistance he's faced, and what a future with new options might look like. Good brother, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and it's an honor to be with you.
Bryan, before we start, I want to give a shout out to Jamie and Penny Helwig, who put us together, and they hosted a fundraiser for you in Texas there with the great Rick Perry, and that's how I was blessed to meet you. And I don't know what's more impressive, your relentless commitment to helping people stay alive and have a divine intervention, or escaping Kentucky poverty, addiction, mental health. I don't know, but it's a heck of a story and a real blessing to have you here.
Well, thank you again for the kind affirmation, and it is the privilege of my life to be of service in this way. I hope it is of service, and I hope that we are able to get the job done that I believe we've been sent here to do.
Yes, sir. Right. Why don't you be so kind to tell folks a little bit? I like we start where you came from and how you ended up doing this and carrying this message.
Well, I was born into the Virginia coal fields to a working class family. I was the first to attend college out of my immediate family. My dad was a lineman for the telephone company. I was blessed to have two beautiful grandfathers who were present with me from the time I was born until the time they passed out of this world. My first memories were of my parents screaming and cussing and hollering at each other. They were very young when they got married, and like a lot of children who grow up poor, they thought young love was their escape from their misery. And by the time I came along, they had come to the end of their relationship, and those first years were just a lot of very unpleasant chaos. And my papaws, both of whom had worked in the mines for 40 years, neither one of whom had a full set of fingers, and both had grade school educations, were beautiful, strong men, and they were very deliberate about taking me to their homes, keeping me as much as they could, and from the time I was old enough to understand language, at some point when I would visit either or both of them, they would put me on their lap and give me a hug. And they'd say, "Papa knows you're scared, but you need to know that Papa prays for you every day. Papa loves you. And more importantly, God loves you. God has a special and unique purpose to achieve with your life. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how scared you are, don't you forget what Papa's telling you, because it is the truth." And if you will hold on to what Papa's telling you, it's going to take care of you through your life. You must remember God is real, God is love, and God has purpose for you. And they told me that again and again and again. And I am convinced, based on how those first, in particular, 12 years went, that had I not had those men that and their light given from God to me, that if I were alive at all, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here with you as I am. I would likely be down in some dark hole, wondering what someone who has held jobs like I have held was going to do and come pull me out of them. And that's how it all started. I received a very idealized version of American history and civics education from fabulous grade school teachers who were either trained during World War II or were trained by ladies who came from that greatest generation. I was taught that America was the shining city on the hill, the last best hope of humankind on earth. And at 50 years old, I'm among those bicentennial children who can remember President Reagan and Morning in America. And I thought that if I went to law school, that would give me the very best chance of serving what I was taught to believe was truth, justice, and the American way, that those rules were designed to guard and honor. So I completed high school, went to undergraduate where I had a wonderful time. And then I went to law school full of vigor and patriotic anticipation of getting out and doing good in the world. And within the first semester of law school, I learned that the law was not a synonym for truth, justice, or anything that resembles factual reality. And then over the course of law practice that followed, which was 16 years doing workers' compensation law in Kentucky, within a system that masquerades as a legal system, but is in fact a political patronage system, I learned that the law is often nothing other than a weapon that is wielded by the hand that pays to use it to bind, torture, and kill the truth. And over those 16 years of practice, I saw the onset and explosion of the opioid epidemic out of central and southern Appalachia out across the rest of the country. I saw it in my cases. I saw it in my hometown in Virginia. I saw it in my home country of Cofield, Appalachia. And I saw it in my family. And I watched it play out at scale. I had an opportunity, a blessing really, to go into state government service at a high level starting in February of 2017 through really just a serendipitous network connection to an expert I had utilized in my cases. I was recruited to run Kentucky's Social Security disability system. And my first job was to understand why Kentucky has been second only to West Virginia for as long as anyone could remember in terms of the number of its people who receive Social Security disability checks. You know, where I was raised, there are families who are generational recipients of Social Security disability. They call it getting on the draw, and they get there and they stay there. And it gives you a subsistence income. It gives you a medical card. It gives you food stamps and, a hand-to-mouth existence. You don't have to do anything for it, and you survive, but you never thrive. We did a 35-year retrospective study, myself and a team of subject matter experts that I had assembled within the state's system. First time that had ever been done by an individual state. And in my first month on the job, before we even got the study underway, we had a visit from the Social Security Administration's program administrator assigned to oversee the state of Kentucky. And in that very first meeting with this individual, I wish I had had an audio recording of this person's opening statement, because literally the first words out of the person's mouth was, "Folks, claims are down, and that's bad because claims equal budget." And what I learned was that this program that the American people think is designed to take care of individuals who, through the misfortunes and events of life, become permanently disabled from a disease or an accident or a workplace injury, is in fact a system that is primarily designed to serve the bureaucracy that administers it, with the actual welfare of the individuals by way of their capacity to live a dignified life being secondary, if relevant at all. And so what I discovered at the end of that 6-month study was that Kentucky's population had grown 20% between 1980 and 2015. Enrollment in the Social Security Disability Program had grown 249% over that same time frame. Childhood enrollment in that program had grown 449% over that same time. And when we paired the issuance of habituating pharmacology, defined as either an opioid or a psychotropic medication to which a person will become physiologically acclimated, so as if they were to stop, they would experience severe adverse effects from the cessation of that medication. We found that among the Social Security disability adult population between 2001 and 2015, the issuance of prescription opioids increased 210% for every Social Security disability recipient, from 47 pills per person up to 147 pills per person.
Wow.
We saw the issuance of habituating psychotropic medication to children increase what was on the scale of 168% from, I have to remember this figure, it was from 257 psychotropic pills per SSI child per year,
Wow,
up to 457 psychotropic pills per child per year. And what we saw within the Social Security disability system was the perpetuation of opioid addiction among adults, not just a perpetuation, but its exacerbation, as well as what I would describe as the pharmacological grooming of children at a young age, with the administration of anti-anxiety, antidepressant, and amphetamine medications to a young child for any number of what are ostensibly mental health conditions that likely are just the natural behavior that arises from growing up in a shattered community, a shattered family, without anything that resembles a coherent familial or social structure. So after I ran that program, I was recruited to run a law enforcement agency called the Office of Medicaid Fraud and Abuse Control, which investigated and prosecuted medical providers for their fraud on the Medicaid system. And what I inherited there was a significant caseload of physicians who practice within medically assisted treatment clinics for addiction, or what your audience may have heard of as clinics that prescribe Suboxone, methadone, Sublocade, and other derivatives, which are essentially opioids with which to treat opioid dependency. Now, I want to make very clear, recovery is an individual path unique to the dependent individual. And opioid maintenance therapy has saved thousands of lives. But the track record demonstrates that it delivers unacceptably mediocre results at scale. Suboxone treatment loses roughly 50% of its patients at intake at the end of 6 months. And for those patients that remain, only 18% are compliant with the treatment regimen at the end of that same 6-month period. Suboxone does marginally better with increased patient retention, but about a 24% compliance rate at the end of 24 months. And we call compliance as refraining from the consumption of any other illicit substances while taking either the Suboxone or the methadone. What I found was that there were a number of clinics under active investigation, some of them jointly with the FBI, for operating as glorified drug dealing operations, where you have a physician with a medical license and his nursing staff with a prescription pad that is pre-signed, and the only thing that they do is run a cattle call every single day, where patients on a monthly basis are given the maximum milligram dosage for the maximum period of time and sent out the door, without any counseling, without any effort to titrate them down from that medication, which was the original design. And it is just this revolving door drug clinic that maximize with the distribution of Suboxone throughout the community as much as possible every single day, which explained a lot of the complaints that I was receiving from community leaders and elected officials of, hey, this stuff's supposed to be helping, but it's all over it's all over the place. And people who are not even addicted are using it. And we've got a huge problem with Suboxone diversion. So Kentucky, as much as I love our people here, its government since the end of the Civil War has been just about the most corrupt in the country. It and Louisiana compete for that designation within its state and local infrastructure. You know, we've got this state that's about, I think, 37th or 38th in total land size. It's got 4.8 million people. We've got 120 counties. These little counties have served as fiefdoms for the local aristocracy ever since they were formed. And government here exists to serve itself and those who are within its aristocracy before it exists to do anything that resembles what a legitimate government should do. And so when the state essentially negotiated out about $1 billion in settlement funds with various opioid manufacturers and distributors for their role in creating the opioid epidemic, the legislature here set up a commission to oversee the distribution of that money and to make sure that it was spent in accordance with what the settlement agreements called for to address the consequences of the opioid epidemic. I was recruited to run the commission by the Attorney General and his deputy. And this would have been in March of 2022. And the question was, would you be interested in standing this thing up and running it and getting the money out the door? And my answer was, this is a very treacherous opportunity. There are vultures in Kentucky who are used to picking the bones of these sorts of opportunities clean, and they're going to expect every bit of this money to flow their way. If you will allow me to run the commission in a way that is accessible to the average Kentuckian, in a way that delivers funds to grassroots community organizations that don't have the cash roll to keep on a permanent grant writer to game applications to get money, as the way as so many others can. If you'll let me run it in a way that is accountable, where we present ourselves to the people of the state, hear what it is that they need, and follow up on our results. And if you'll let me run it so that it is transparent, meaning we construct a map of every county that money goes into, and anyone who wants to know can follow where every single cent we spend goes. Who's been awarded it, what it's being used for, complete and total transparency. If you give me this discretion, I'll do the job. And they said, you've got it. So I took the job. And at the time, what they didn't know was that in 2018, I started following really what I thought was remarkable news that time. The psilocybin, or what's known as the magic mushroom, was demonstrating otherworldly power to impact people who had been afflicted with treatment-resistant depression and anxiety for years. And I come from a family that has a wicked generational history with alcohol. And the psilocybin mushroom is also being discovered to dramatically reduce not just alcohol use, but the desire for alcohol in people who had been alcohol dependent for years. So this caught my attention. I became independently curious, and a friend of mine's sister worked within the psychedelic underground facilitating psilocybin journeys. And because of what I was reading about not just the physiological impact, but the spiritual awakening that psilocybin could create, I said, I think I want to understand. I want to know what this is about, because growing up, I was very much a rah-rah, ultra-conservative Republican. Whenever I thought about psychedelics, I thought about, a bunch of hedonistic debauchery out of the late 60s. Put stock and roll around in the mud and taking your clothes off. There was no positive connotation in my mind around psychedelics. So between 2018 and 2022, I had somewhere around 8 to 12 psilocybin journeys of various intensity. The least one was about 3 grams. The My ceiling was 13 grams, and I will never go back. That's the highest ceiling I ever want to touch. Most of those experiences were profoundly beautiful. Some of them were profoundly terrifying. All of them were profoundly meaningful. And I became a believer that our Creator has placed upon this earth plants right from the nature the Creator has engineered that allow us to heal the wounds we inflict on ourselves, heal the wounds we inflict on each other, and to be affirmed in the reality of our human divinity. I believe that as much as I believe the sun sits at the center of our solar system and is hot. So after I got the job, I said, one of the things we need to do with this money is look for an opportunity to set aside a small percentage of the funds, maybe 5%, to research whether we can create a therapeutic breakthrough for opioid dependency. The options we have are better than nothing, but we should always be trying to do better and to improve the human condition as government. That's its job. And I don't know what that breakthrough might be, but I'm going to get to looking for it. So an author who I had read for some time, who had written beautifully about her own plant medicine experiences, I reached out to her in July of 2022, just 1 month after I had been announced to lead the commission. And I said, hey, what could you tell me about psychedelics and whether there's anything that has special application to opioid dependency? And she asked me for the first time, I heard the word Ibogaine on July 22nd of 22 when she said, have you ever heard of Ibogaine? And I had not. So this touched off months of a second full-time job performed off the books, undercover, to learn as much as I could from the most renowned academic researchers, from individuals who had received Ibogaine, not just to treat opioid dependency, but to treat any number of traumas, much of which had been inflicted on warfighters, special operators who had been overseas and had come home to be faced with, a Veterans Administration whose best response to their physical and spiritual carnage that they had experienced was a cocktail of synthetic pharmacology that in sum total anesthetized the soul while slowly euthanizing the body. On the verge of death, they went to Mexico and heard about this Ibogaine drug down there, or what they thought was a drug. And in fact, they found out that it is a divine restorative medication that had the capacity to save their lives when it didn't appear as though anything else could. So as I got into the science of it around opioid dependency, what I learned was that when we give a person Suboxone, when we give them methadone, we're giving them a lower dosage opioid that will hopefully allow them to return to a functional life. But we are not allowing that brain to be free from the opioid. A brain captive to opioid dependency is a brain that cannot produce its own dopamine and serotonin. Those production capacities have been fully impaired by the use of opioids. So when a person comes off and they experience withdrawal, and they exhibit this behavior that is maniacal, what we used to think of as just totally depraved criminality is in fact the behavior of a person who has experienced a profound neurochemical brain injury. And it takes about 18 months for that person's brain to even begin to produce dopamine and serotonin on its own, and it may never recover its normal levels. Ibogaine, for reasons that are not known and by a mechanism that is not understood, has the capacity to essentially restore an individual's neurochemistry to that which existed before they ever took the first pill. And that includes bringing dopamine and serotonin production up to that which existed before they ever took their first opioid. So understanding that the crucible for the dependent individual is the navigation of months and perhaps years of withdrawal syndrome, I presented to the Kentucky Attorney General the reality of Ibogaine as a medication that can essentially, on a remarkably fast track, fully resolve physiological opioid dependency within 80% of people who have a single dose, with that number going up to 97% with a second supportive dose. And I advised the Attorney General that based on the individuals I had spoken with who had had an Ibogaine treatment, that there are two other fabulous properties that come with it. One is an affirmed sense of individual personal ownership, where someone whose life has been defined by the compulsions of addiction comes away with a sense that they, for the very first time, have ownership of their self. They have control of their future. And with that ownership control, they can live a life that will be defined by their choices, rather than mercilessly driven by compulsions over which they have no control. It liberates the mind. And then for many folks, because of the introspective experience that Ibogaine can provide, an individual will often come away with a concrete individual affirmation of their human divinity, and they will know that they have a soul and that that soul has been given to them by a creator who stands outside of time, but who is mindful of each of us. And it is that latter property that, to me, is the greatest gift it can offer. And so on May the 31st of 2023, I stood on the grounds of the Kentucky State Capitol and declared that the commission under my leadership would explore the possibility of allocating $42 million in a public-private partnership that would be matched by $42 million from a drug developer to drive Ibogaine all the way through the FDA's drug development process. And I've done a lot of talking, and that's kind of part one. And I'm going to stop so you can ask any questions and we can keep going.
You're one of the most eloquent speakers I've ever heard, Bryan. I don't know if you need to stop. I actually don't want you to stop. Keep going.
Okay. After the May 31st public hearing, we conducted in the administrative office of the court's headquarters where the Kentucky Supreme Court convenes. We conducted 3 high-profile public hearings, one in July, one in September, and one in October that explored all dimensions of Ibogaine. The first was on the science. The second was on the experiences of those who had received the medication. And then the third was on the question of whether the FDA would approve Ibogaine as a medication, because it comes with a very serious cardiac risk factor, whereby if a person has certain predispositions to a slowing of the heart, or an expanded period of time between heartbeats, or if the person's given too much, it can cause a condition called torsades, which is a heart arrhythmia that could stop the heart and make the person die. And we took this very seriously. This was, opioid funds are blood money. People died in the thousands here. That's why we have this money. So if we were going to use these one-time non-recurring funds bought with people's lives, we wanted to make sure everything we did was fully out in the open, completely transparent for anybody to look at forever. And today, you can go back and look at 3, 4.5 hour hearings that were conducted by the Kentucky Opioid Commission in 23, where that record is perfectly preserved. So 2023 was an election year. Daniel Cameron, who was the Attorney General who authorized me to undertake this project, unfortunately lost the governor's election, and he was succeeded by a new Attorney General, also a Republican, who ultimately decided that he didn't want anything to do with this project. I had hoped to have an opportunity to speak with him and to fully brief him on all of the developmental energy that had gathered around this project in Kentucky, and that included the commitments of drug developers who could develop Ibogaine to come and set up shop in Kentucky and anchor all of their research and development activity here, as well as the commitments of high-level philanthropists to be partners with the state to drive the success of this project. I had asked for a meeting, was told one would happen, and on December 15th, 2023, a Friday afternoon, when I was going to be going to Louisville that evening to the Muhammad Ali Center for Peace and Justice to show and have the privilege of watching a documentary by Lamar Odom about his own recovery journey with Ibogaine to a predominantly African-American audience there. I instead walked into what was essentially an ambush meeting with the incoming attorney members of his transition team, and a couple of staff members he was holding over, and he made very clear, he said, I don't want anything to do with this. I don't appreciate how you've been an advocate for it, and I want your resignation on my desk before I take office on January 2nd, 2024. This was completely unexpected, but the decision had been made. I knew that I was going to find a job, but in my opinion, there was transformative opportunity based upon a reality that had been articulated by many people, in particular, war heroes who had traveled to Kentucky and borne their soul at a time when public discussion of this was still very much taboo, to illuminate and educate the people of Kentucky and my commission members as to what this could really do. And it was profound. And to have had all of that summarily trashed within a split-second conversation was breathtaking. So my greatest despair was whether or not all that work had been for nothing, and whether any set of circumstances could arise to help me salvage the project.
Bryan, let me interrupt you there. How did you deal with that heartbreak? Because I know how committed you are in helping your people. How did that was such a gut shot, man.
Oh, and I stood up and reached for the door of the conference room to walk out the door. I said a prayer once, and I continued to say it for the next 8 months, over and over and over again. God, help me, help me. Please, Lord, help me. Please, Lord, help me. Give me the strength, give me the energy. Please show me, Lord. Help me, Lord. Help me. Help me, Lord.
Yeah, beautiful.
Sum total of what I did. And then I went wherever I thought there could be an opportunity to give it life. And that involved, through what was a remarkable blessing, a gentleman by the name of Rex Elsas has a foundation called the Reed Foundation, named after his son Reed, who at 27 years old passed away of a fentanyl overdose in 2019. Rex had followed what I had done in Kentucky. He lives in Columbus, Ohio. Ohio has its own opioid addiction problem, particularly in the southeastern part of the state. And he said, I've watched what you've been doing. I believe in what you've been doing. Would you be willing to come to work with me in my foundation? I think I can open some doors here in Ohio, and maybe we can keep this alive. I said, absolutely. So with Rex's involvement, I spent the next several months going to the state of Ohio, meeting with Governor DeWine, meeting with his staff around mental health and drug policy, meeting with the head of their opioid foundation, anyone and everyone who I could speak to about what I had tried to do in Kentucky, and looking for an opportunity to get Ohio engaged. This went on for months, and while folks were always very patient and kind to listen, asked very thoughtful questions, there was really no movement. In May, either in April or May of 24, there was an outreach from then Governor Kristi Noem out of South Dakota, who expressed interest. And there were some discussions with her and members of her administration, as well as a couple of health systems in South Dakota, that transpired between April and July of 24. And then I received a phone call from the health services secretary out there, who said, as much as we would love to do this, we've had a ballot initiative make its way on for the November election that will substantially reduce South Dakota's sales tax. And until that's resolved, we can't make a move. And I just...
Lord help me, Lord help me, Lord help me.
Yes. So in August of 24, I got a phone call from a couple of leaders of nonprofit organizations in Texas who focus on mental health transformation and happen to align with the advancement of plant medicine in Texas and across the country, one of which is Texans for Greater Mental Health. And these folks said, we've been following what you've been doing in Kentucky, following what you're trying to do in Ohio. And they advised that Texas had funded a $2 million psilocybin project back in, I think it was 2021. And they said, hey, we think Texas is ready for its next big psychedelic project. What do you think it should be? And I said, well, I think Texas needs to finish the job that we started in Kentucky. And I explained to them what that was. And they said, well, we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks. Take this to some legislators we know and see if they might be willing to back. So they went and they came back and they said, we got some sponsors. What do you think? I said, well, I got one phone call to make. As I did the Kentucky project, I had been blessed to be introduced to Governor Perry. Governor Perry had been in support of the Kentucky project. He had reported a video for me that was used in one of the Kentucky hearings, and he'd occasionally check up on me. We weren't the best of friends, but I had his telephone number. And after these calls in August, I gave him a call and I said, hey, I ain't from there. I wasn't born there. And I know you Texans, you're very hospitable, but I don't want to be presumptuous. And I described for him what was going on. And he said, well, Bryan, I've been out of the scene since 2015 when I left office. The new guy never likes the old guy hanging around very much. But this is different. There's nothing more important that I can do with the remainder of my life than to try to make this a reality for anybody who would want to have it. And he said, I don't want to put nothing on you that you don't want, but if you're willing to spend as much time as you can down here in Texas to be the quarterback of this effort, I'll stand on the sideline and be the coach, and we'll see if we can't get it done. So on October 30 of 2024, Governor Perry and I met up in Austin. We convened a group of 30 committed Texans who knew about Ibogaine, knew what it could do, who had been personally impacted within their own families by either loved ones who had drug addiction or alcohol problems. And we pledged then and there that we would do everything that we could with 188 blank slate legislators, a deeply Christian conservative lieutenant governor, as well as a conservative governor, to try to get Texas to make the Kentucky Ibogaine Initiative the Texas Ibogaine Initiative.
Wow.
So between the middle of November of 2024 all the way up to May 14th of 2025, myself, with the help of a gentleman by the name of Logan Davidson, through the Reed Foundation and through Texans for Greater Mental Health, as well as Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, 3 aligned organizations, I led an effort that resulted in what was a sum total of 181 Texas legislators between the House and Senate voting yes to 7 voting no, the blessing of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and on June the 9th, the signature of Governor Greg Abbott for what is a $50 million appropriation out of the state of Texas to be matched by $50 million from a drug developer to drive Ibogaine all the way through the FDA. This is a historic accomplishment on 2 fronts. First of all, with this $50 million, Texas has made, and what I hope will be a short-lived record, it has made the largest public investment in all history in psychedelic research and medical development by itself. It is also the first state ever to commit funds for direct drug development to foster a therapeutic breakthrough within the context of multiple concurrent public health crises within its borders, which are representative of the national reality. We're sitting here on February 8, 2026, just about 8 months from the signature Governor Abbott put on that paper. As I speak to you, there are bills to join Texas that have already been passed by the Mississippi House of Representatives, 110-1, and that bill is on its way to the Senate. Another bill that has passed the West Virginia House of Delegates, 98-0. Bills that have been filed in Oklahoma and Tennessee, bills that will be filed in Louisiana, Michigan, Missouri, Alabama, perhaps Maryland. And I believe that by the time the 2026 legislative season is over, we will see at least 6 and perhaps as many as 8 additional states pass appropriations mandates to join the Ibogaine drug development trial that will begin in Texas and expand out across the rest of the country. And I think that we'll see more shoes drop after that in 2027. This is the moonshot of our time. It is also a parable about where we're at as America. And I mentioned to you, at 50, I consider myself a child of the bicentennial, though born just a little before it occurred. This country is in deep, deep, deep trouble. for all of our material wealth and technological advancement, and it has no peer in this world, we are spiritually destitute. A country that was founded as the New Jerusalem is slouching toward Babylon. And if we don't do something now to fundamentally reestablish this nation's spiritual foundation as a place where everyone is endowed by their acknowledged creator with life, liberty, and the right to pursue happiness, and we don't do it now, we may very well lose the opportunity for generations to come, and what we have now by way of opportunity is too precious to let go. And that's what this is about.
Wow. God, that's beautiful, man. Congratulations. Wow. Who's Ibogaine for? Who's the person? Who's it right for?
It's right for the individual who has tried every way they can to break physiological substance dependence and finds themselves mourning, mourning, each new sunrise because they'd just rather be dead. The person who has experienced a lifetime of trauma with which they have self-medicated, the person who finds themselves at the very bottom of life, or what I have called the end of hope, from whatever trauma that has led to addiction or addiction that has led to trauma that they have. If you are at the end and nothing else has worked, Ibogaine is the last best stop you can make before you commit to taking yourself out of this world. So that's the first kind of person that it's for. Ibogaine comes from the Iboga tree, which grows in the central Congo basin. The mother country is Gabon, a place that I had the privilege of visiting just 1 month ago. And the original possessors of Iboga knowledge are the Pygmies. And they have for thousands of years known and recognized Iboga to be a divine intermediary growing straight from the ground that has the power to affirm and to connect us to the divinity gifted to us by our Creator. So if you are a human being who is estranged, most of us lethally so, from the existence of your soul, I would suggest that Ibogaine may be for you as well. If you want your mind to be introduced to your soul, and you have the courage to endure the bitter medicine that it is, because it is a rough, difficult, unpleasant experience, Ibogaine is for you. If you're someone who has a neurological disorder in the form of Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, or Lyme disease, it can potentially substantially improve symptoms of debility so that you can have a self-sufficient, productive life in a way that current medication cannot necessarily provide. And that's a summary of who I would think it's for.
No, that's beautiful. And Bryan, this treatment right now, most people are doing that in Mexico, correct?
Yes, sir.
And could you walk the audience through what that process looks like, kind of the cost, how they find somebody? I believe there's a woman that has a guidelines. Could you mention that process, please?
So, Ibogaine is a Schedule I substance in the United States, which means that pursuant to the Controlled Substance Act, it is not recognized as having any therapeutic value, nor as well as a high propensity for abuse. And this is flatly factually incorrect, and is an example of the many fictitious legal realities that are ensconced within the U.S. legal system that are meant to do violence to legitimate reality. And there are many. If a person wants Ibogaine presently, there are clinics in Mexico that offer it. There are a variety of these clinics that have a variety of physical facility, a variety of approaches, a variety of philosophies. I'm not familiar with all of them. I am familiar with some of them. There is a lady by the name of Juliana Mulligan who has an organization called Intervision Ibogaine, and in fact, Americans for Ibogaine is about to debut its clinical standards team that will articulate what need to be the minimum standards for both safety and efficacy for Ibogaine treatment, as that we believe that reality will emerge in the United States. If somebody wants to understand where they can go, I would refer them to Juliana Mulligan. Unfortunately, here recently there have been stories about deaths out of the Mexican clinics. One of the harsh realities about drug dependency in the United States is the proliferation of fentanyl and the dynamic, almost daily evolution of those synthetic chemicals that are paired with fentanyl to amplify its addictive effects. A lot of these chemicals are changing by the day, and they have the potential to evade the very best drug screening techniques that we have, and certainly the clinics in Mexico have. So the Mexican environment is one where there's some good quality and there's some bad. The Mexican reality is a necessary reality, but one that is not ideal. And I wish that I could tell your patients without reservation that there were, one or more places they could go, and it was going to be a top-level, top-notch experience commensurate with what one would expect out of the U.S. medical system. Some of them get close, but there's nothing that resembles a uniform, concrete standard as it relates to either efficacy or safety and Ibogaine administration in Mexico.
Got it. And Bryan, have you had any backlash from the recovery community?
I'm going to divide the recovery community in two. There is the entrepreneurial recovery community, the recovery community that through nonprofits or even through for-profit operations have created the clinics that are, by rough analogy, the retailers for all of the evidence-based best practices, whether it's talk therapy, whether that's abstinence-based treatment, or medically assisted treatment. They are the delivery infrastructure. I always face some initial skepticism as well as some concern from recovery treatment providers within that entrepreneurial infrastructure. Fear of the unknown, fear of what is fear-mongered around Ibogaine by way of its potential lethality. And I want your audience to know that every year in the United States, at least 3,000 people die of legally prescribed methadone, at least, just from the medication itself. And you don't have those put up into the clean lights or the headlines or the spotlights when they happen. It's just an accepted part of reality within addiction treatment, which kind of tells the tale, in my opinion. Once the leaders of recovery communities and recovery centers within an entrepreneurial world understand how Ibogaine can improve outcomes, understand that their infrastructure is vitally necessary to be enabled to build an Ibogaine-based treatment ecosphere that maximizes the therapeutics benefit while, reducing costs on the front end to resource services on the back end that we currently can't supply, they usually come around. There's another part of the recovery community, and we're going to call it the government public health system. That government public health system is, it's very much a creature of our time. And what do I mean by that? I come out of a blue-collar family, and the wisest people I've ever known in my life didn't even have a high school degree and never darkened the door of a college. And I ain't got nothing against people against college degrees. I've got one. But this notion that a person has to have a sheet of paper from a 4-year school or some, postgraduate degree or a JD or something else to be able to speak to what's good and to what's not good and to have a credential in order to have legitimacy is poison. And there's a lot of credentialism in our society where if you don't have this degree from this institution, then you're not even allowed to talk, let alone have an opinion. I think the public health system has a lot of folks like that in it. If you don't have a series of alphabets beside your name, you're to sit there and listen and not be heard. And you're there to take what is given without question, without challenge, because those people have earned their credentials and their credentials make them experts, and that's it. And these experts have been trained within an educational process formed in no small part by the influence of the pharmaceutical industry that looks to build value and to build expected long-term return on investment in the creation of that educational infrastructure, which seems in the minds of these folks to suggest that what we have now is the best we will ever have and all that we should ever have because it is the best. They engage in this circular reasoning whereby, you have to prescribe the evidence-based best practice treatment because anything that's not the evidence-based practice treatment is not the evidence-based practice treatment. To which I asked the question, how did it become the evidence-based best practice treatment? There was a chicken there before that egg hatched, and that egg was scientific research to determine what worked. So if you're going to take what research built and say this is the evidence-based best practice, and we can't try anything else because it's not the evidence-based best practice, well, where do you ever find another egg? Or is this the chicken that we're supposed to have now and forevermore? The public health system, as currently educated, and with and this is not everybody, because there's folks within it who recognize what we have needs improvement. But oftentimes they're too afraid to speak because, these bastions of bureaucracy and high-minded academician approach are very retributive. And they like to kneecap people's careers unless they fall in line and conform with the status quo. So despite the fact that you have people who are intellectual dissidents, they oftentimes sit there in silence because they don't want to be kneecapped by public health professionals who think that they're the experts, they've been taught what's best, and there can be nothing more than what they have. It's remarkably retrograde, it's remarkably arrogant, and it's very symptomatic of 2026 America. And those people I pity them because their minds have been poisoned to believe that everything that they have is the apex of scientific accomplishment, despite concrete, objectively demonstrated escalating rates of dependency, overdose, and just until recently, increasing rates of death, despite its aggressive deployment, and despite the fact that the evidence-based best practice treatment buprenorphine, or what is name brand Suboxone, is purveyed by a convicted federal criminal, Indivior, which before these multi-state settlement agreements offered a federal guilty plea and paid $2 billion to the federal government for engaging in an illicit scheme to increase the issuance of Suboxone prescriptions nationwide. And as a term of that settlement, they had to permanently disband their internal sales team for Suboxone because of how thoroughly deceptive they had been in terms of understating risks of addiction, in terms of understating the risks of misuse, and in terms of trying to get as many doctors to prescribe maximum dosages over maximum time frames as possible. So, I've always said to the public health establishment, let's just be honest. The people who created the problem that you're treating with the evidence-based best practice are also the producers of the evidence-based best practice.
Yeah. Wow.
Let's pay attention that the people who made the problem are the people who are telling you what you're doing is the best way to treat it. Use your mind.
Yeah,
and I'm
right
not here
on,
to say get rid of it. I'm just here to say we need to be about the business of improving the human condition. If you ain't waking up every day asking yourself, what can I do better? What can we do better? How can we make this better? If you're sitting there resting on your laurels with a certificate that says, I prescribe the evidence-based best practice, and you don't think you've got to do nothing more?
Got it.
Find something else to do that doesn't relate to, treating the human condition.
I think you'll appreciate this, Bryan. I actually believe it's why God brought us together here on Super Bowl Sunday, okay? When I was 12 years old, at 3500 North 75th Street, the Viva Venus apartment complex in Scottsdale, Arizona, I was kidnapped. And I was tortured and I was used for child pornography.
Oh.
Okay, brother? And like you, I had some spiritual elders that gave me a very direct message like your grandfather. I was not able to hear that message till much later in life. Through God's grace and people like you, I've taken that incident and made it my superpower. I got the gift of sobriety at 22 years of age. I've been sober 39 years. I've been on the front lines for 28 years as a therapist coach, specializing in addictions and trauma. In the year 2020 to the year 2000, to where we stand today, in my shell community here, of all the people that I treat, we've lost over 73 individuals, okay, to overdoses, mainly fentanyl and suicide. Of those, 85% were under the age of 28. I can't take another fucking phone call from a mom. I lost my son, Seano. And I know I will take hits from this because I love 12-step recovery. I will continue to host 12-step meetings, but it's not, we don't have a monopoly on recovery. I've seen these medicines work in people. I want this message to get out. I want people to breathe again. I want them to connect to God. I want them to have a sense of purpose. And I want them to get out of this horrific existence. And that's why I believe God brought us together today, sir.
Seano, I am sorry for what you experienced, but I'm thankful for who it has made you be. And what you describe is what exists within the United States at scale, and that is profound spiritual affliction driven by the mass dissolution of family and community that has played out from one end of this country to the other since the late 60s and the mid 70s. We live in a profoundly broken society.
Okay.
And until there is a genuine spiritual awakening for individuals and in families and in communities, can be restored in the knowledge of the ineffable nature of the human existence and how precious and special it is to have the breath of God in our bodies, we are doomed to stumble in the dark. And this is a mission of light. And for everybody who is desperate for where does our help come from? Our help comes from on high, who has planted right in the ground medicines of divine engineering that can help take the scales off of our eyes and the thorns out of our hearts.
That's beautiful. Bryan, when can we expect to see clinics in operation in the United States?
Oh, gosh. Well, in terms of operational clinics, we're probably, unfortunately, years away. I think we can expect to see clinical trials begin, which is the very first step to making Ibogaine a reality within this calendar year, certainly. I would like to think that if we really move fast, that within the next 6 years, we can have an approved medication, which would mean that the process of developing what a clinical infrastructure looks like needs to begin now. This is an incredibly complex set of problems. It's an incredibly complex and diverse society that we live in. And there needs to be a highly individualized framework through which this medicine can be delivered, certainly with commonalities that apply to all, but one that calls for flexibility to reach communities that have their own unique cultural outlook on how to do things. So I would like to say we're sitting here in 2026. I would like to say that by or before the time we turn into the next decade, we can have a hard and fast statement. We can say, Ibogaine clinics in the United States are very much in their reality. Get ready.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, brother. Final thoughts for the audience?
The very best thing that your audience can do, I think, is take what they have heard here, spread it to their friends. All change in America begins at the kitchen table. Talk to your family, talk to your friends. Use that social media and electronic gadgets that you carry around to spread the good word that God is real, God is love, and God has planted within this very earth a number of things that can help us connect to the ultimate reality, which is our own eternal significance as individuals. You Seano, have a unique and special purpose to achieve with your life, as does every member of your audience, as does every person who carries God's breath in their body. Don't get sucked into the mass media mayhem machine. Don't look at your neighbor through the poison prism of the social media filter, and don't give in to the pathos of our age. The dividend of reality, the dividend of division is control. And there are a lot of forces at play in America that want to keep us divided, because as long as we can be separated from each other in our common divinity, we will forever be subjugated by everybody who's pulling the life out of us. The time is now to break the chains off of each other's necks and wrists. And Seano, you and I hopefully are brothers in the cause to do just that. And I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this evening.
God bless you, brother. And thank you for never giving up, man. What an incredible teacher you've been to me. Thank you. Thank you. The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarland, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Cornelick. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.